Today we're jumping into the Twilight Masquerade format, using data from over 150 City League tournaments from Japan. Using LimitlessTCG.com and TrainerHill.com, I'll be showing you the popularity of each archetype within top 16 placements from City Leagues, as well as using TrainerHill.com to generate deck lists for each of these archetypes. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content, and check out ways to support my channel in the description down below. We're going to kick things off with Dragapult EX, the new card from Twilight Masquerade that everybody's talking about, and it looks like it's not only going to be popular, but also very, very good. Almost 25% of the City League top 16s have been made up by Dragapult EX decks, totaling 599 Dragapult EX decks in top 16 of these City Leagues. Before we break down Dragapult into each of its variants, I want to look at this 50 card skeleton that is just straight Dragapult. So this is generated by the Trainer Hill tool, like I said, and this just shows you the most common cards being included in Dragapult EX decks in general. In addition to these 50 cards, we also have the most popular other cards, falling between an inclusion rate of 45% and 12%. These are the cards most commonly being used to fill out that 50 card skeleton, but we'll be looking at 4 specific variants of Dragapult, and I'll give 60 card deck lists for each of those. So Dragapult EX overall is roughly 25% of the top 16 meta in these City League events, but if we break it down further, we'll see that Dragapult EX with specifically Xatu is roughly 10%. With 267 Dragapult EX Xatu decks. Here you'll see the generated 60 card deck list for Dragapult EX Xatu, which uses Xatu as both energy acceleration and a way to draw cards. The most popular ace spec here is Scoop Up Cyclone, coming in at over 50% of Dragapult Xatu decks, including Scoop Up Cyclone. But I also think that Unfair Stamp is a noteworthy card that I personally really like in Dragapult EX decks. The next most popular variant of Dragapult EX is Pidgeot EX, coming in at just over 6% of the meta with 155 Dragapult EX Pidgeot EX decks within the top 16 placements. Something you'll notice between all Dragapult EX decks is just about all of them have some way to accelerate energy or make up for more than one energy in a turn. Of course, with the Xatu variant, they're using Xatu, but here in the Dragapult EX Pidgeot EX variant, you'll see the supporter card Mela, as well as Neo Upper Energy. Neo Upper Energy is mostly being included in the Dragapult Pidgeot versions as a way to get more than one energy attached in one turn, in addition to the Mela, but in other variants that are playing Xatu or Mirage Gate or Charizard EX as their energy accelerants, you'll see Unfair Stamp and Scoop Up Cyclone typically being the ace specs. Next in line is Dragapult Charizard, which is 3.30% of the meta with 83 decks in the top 16s. And just as I said, here we're using Charizard EX as the energy accelerant, so you won't see Neo Upper Energy in this variant of Dragapult. You'll see Scoop Up Cyclone or Unfair Stamp. But in the Dragapult Charizard variants, I've noticed a large increase of Scoop Up Cyclone over the other ace specs of choice. This is because it can be used to pick up either a Dragapult EX or a Charizard EX in this variant of the deck. Something to remember with this is that it looks like this is too clunky of a deck and that it's just 2 stage 2s with not a lot of support, but it's important to remember that Dracloak, the middle stage of Dragapult, has a very good ability that allows you to look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put one into your hand and one on the bottom, and this deck's also running the new Tatsugiri that allows you to look at the top 6 cards of your deck and find a supporter there. So this deck actually runs a lot better than you might think it does on first glance, so don't count this one out. And then the last specific variant of Dragapult I want to look at is Dragapult Lost Zone, which accounts for 2.57% of the metagame with 63 Dragapult Lost Zone decks within these top 16 placements. Dragapult EX Lost Zone kind of works because of Dracloak's ability and also for the fact that you can leave your board fully single prize with Dracloak's Comphase and then using Cramorant, Sableye, and Radiant Charizard as your attackers until you're ready to evolve into a Dragapult EX, which is very hard to knock out because it has no weakness. So this can be a very resilient deck that forces your opponent through awkward prize cards, and then you just use the incredible power of Dragapult EX for for your mid to late game whenever you choose to. So Dragapult EX as a whole takes up about 25% of the meta in Japanese City League events. I do think this percentage has been accelerated a little by the new card syndrome. You know, Dragapult EX did just come out, so 25% is really high. If I had to guess what we'll see it at NAIC in the West, I'd guess that Dragapult EX would probably be around 18%, maybe 20% at NAIC. I don't think it's going to be a quarter of the tournament, though. That would be really, really high. And also remember, this isn't a quarter of all decks being played. It's a quarter of all top 16 decks at City Leagues. We don't have the full 64 lists from every single City League. We have the top 16. So this is more so the meta share of the successful decks, not the meta share of all decks. The only other archetype here that is going to be over 10% is Lugia VSTAR, with 348 decks, equaling 14.22% of the top 16 meta. Lugia VSTAR as an archetype really stands to benefit from the Twilight Masquerade set. It gains Blood Moon Ursaluna EX, the new Carmine supporter card, the water type Ogerpon EX, the new Jamming Tower, Stadium, as well as the most important card that it gains, Legacy Energy, which provides a rainbow energy and also makes your opponent take one less prize card from knocking out the Pokemon it's attached to. However, you can only use that effect once per game. The reason why Legacy Energy is so important to Lugia is now we can use attackers like Iron Hands for its Ampy Very Much, and the new Water type Ogerpon EX for its second attack. You can even use Aqua Return on Lumineon, shuffling the Legacy Energy back into the deck, and then use it later for one of these other aforementioned attacks. So this adds some versatility to Lugia and a lot of power, and this is really the ace spec that Lugia has been waiting for. Carmine is also pretty important for the deck, in my opinion, because now you can use a supporter on turn 1 going first. Lugia wants to go first, but sometimes the hands can be awkward because of all the supporters in the deck. Now you can use Lumineon to search out Carmine, discard your hand, draw 5 on the first turn of the game. So I also think that's going to be a notable buff for this archetype. With Dragapult EX and Lugia VSTAR out of the way, combined, those decks take up about 40% of the top 16 placements. We're moving on to a huge chunk of decks between 3 to 7% of the metagame, with the third most popular deck in the top 16 being Lost Zone Giratina, with 192 decks, taking up 7.84% of the top 16 meta. We'll see that in Japanese Giratina deck lists right now, Iron Leaves EX has been omitted in most lists because Charizard EX is no longer the most popular deck. You know, we're talking about the number 3 most popular here at Giratina, which is 7.8% of the meta. We haven't covered Charizard yet, so Charizard's going to be at most 7% of the meta. So with Lugia being 15 and Dragapult being 25%, Iron Leaves EX just isn't pulling as much weight over in that metagame. But again, I want to note that Dragapult EX is new. Lugia just got a lot of new cards to try out, so this new card phenomenon could be skewing, and I believe it is skewing the percentages in Japan right now. And we will see different percentages in the West when it comes time for NAIC. The only new card here to note for Lost Zone Giratina is Blood Moon Ursaluna EX, which is just a very, very generally usable card. We're going to see this in a lot of decks. And like I mentioned, there's no Iron Leaves EX here, but I do think that in the West, Charizard is going to retain more popularity than we're seeing in these results today. And Iron Leaves EX will likely be making it in the Lost Zone Giratina lists for that Charizard matchup. And next at the number 4 spot today, with 188 decks and 7.68% of the meta, is going to be Charizard EX. Charizard EX is commonly being built with the combination of Pidgeot EX and B-Barrel, as we've seen popularized by Tord at the recent EUIC. The Charmander line is changing a little bit to account for Dragapult EX's 6 damage counters, so you'll see that we include 3 Charmanders with 70 hit points and just the 1 Heat Tackle Charmander, since that has 60 health, and that will be easily KO'd by a Dragapult EX. There are a lot of ace specs to choose from for this deck, between Prime Catcher, Maximum Belt, Hero's Cape, and now Unfair Stamp. But Maximum Belt is looking pretty good because it's great against Dragapult EX, it's good against other Charizard EX variants, it's also good against early game against Miraidon EX, Iron Hands EX, Chien Pal EX, but Unfair Stamp is an incredibly strong card, as well as Prime Catcher and Hero's Cape, so it's really going to be a toss-up what your Charizard EX opponent is playing as their ace spec, because there are just so many good ones for this archetype. In addition to Max Belt, we actually have another way to boost damage now with the Kieran supporter card, which allows you to choose one. Either switch your active with a benched Pokemon, or your Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's Pokemon EX and Pokemon V this turn, which is actually a huge buff. So Charizard EX, if your opponent takes 2 prizes, is doing 240 damage with Burning Darkness. Then if you add a Max Belt onto that, it's doing 290 damage. Then if you add a Kieran on top of that, it's doing 320 damage. So we are actually reaching some pretty astronomical numbers now, even earlier in the game with Charizard, if you're running this combination of Kieran and Max Belt against EX decks. Next, we have Lost Zone Box with 151 decks at 6% of the top 16 meta. Lost Zone Box is not looking too much different at all compared to the current Lost Zone Box deck lists in the West, just including that new Blood Moon Ursaluna EX, which I mentioned a lot of decks are going to be including this as the game goes on, and Blood Moon Ursaluna EX's attack costs less, just like the Radiant Charizard. You're definitely going to want to be looking out for this attacker because it has high HP and deals 240 damage for as low as 0 energy thanks to its ability. Next is Miraidon EX decks with 146 decks in the top 16, accounting for 5.96% of that meta. So Miraidon EX was pretty popular prior to the rotation, and then with rotation we had Future Hands become more popular than it. But now we've flip-flopped back to the Miraidon decks actually being more popular than the Future Hands decks, with Miraidon EX actually winning the recent Champions League. So those the City League results have also mirrored the Champions League results, that Miraidon EX with Iron Hands EX is back into being the top meta way to play Iron Hands EX outside of Lost Zone Box decks. And we'll see that this has taken some tools that the Future Hands decks have been using. This is utilizing Heavy Baton to conserve energy, as well as double Turbo Energy to be able to attack earlier with Ampy very much. The only new card featured in this generated 60 for the deck is the new Tatsugiri, but I've also seen Blood Moon Ursaluna EX popping up in Miraidon deck lists as well. Moving on to Gardevoir EX with 110 decks showing up in the top 16 for 4.49% of the meta. And just a quick spoiler, we'll also have Chien Pal next with the exact amount of decks and the exact percentage as Gardevoir as well. But focusing in on Gardevoir EX here for a second, Gardevoir EX actually got second at the recent Champions League in Japan. And the Champions League list was pretty weird, and it played Irida instead of Arven, which just made really no sense. So I definitely prefer this 60 that the Trainer Hill tool has generated for us today, using Arven, using Technical Machine Evolution, and notably using that new Monkey Dory that allows you to move 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon, as long as Monkey Dory has Darkness Energy attached to it. So Gardevoir EX has now started to include these 2 Dark Energies to use that Monkey Dory ability, which is actually a really strong ability. We'll also see that this list is including Unfair Stamp, which I think is just undoubtedly the best ace spec for Gardevoir. We don't need the Hero's Cape anymore as much if Monkey Dory is helping us do a little more damage. So Unfair Stamp is just an incredible card, and like the name says, it feels very unfair when you take the first prize card and then get shuffled down to 2 cards in hand. Like I mentioned, Chien Pal is next with the same percent and deck count as Gardevoir in these City League events. Chien Pal not looking too different at all from the Western meta with Chien Pal recently. The Chien Excalibur list generated by Trainer Hill is actually playing 0 new cards from Twilight Masquerade, although the deck list changes a tiny bit here based on what we know from the West. It's playing an Arctibax, potentially to help against Dragapult, so you can have a Frigibax evolve into an Arctibax and be ready to evolve into a Excalibur without rare candy. That also helps against TM Devo and Airy strategies as well. But other than that, this looks pretty cookie cutter for what we've seen in the West, maybe except for that boss's orders, really valuing the Gust. I actually saw that there are a lot of Chien lists in Japan even going all the way up to 2 bosses orders, in addition to that counter catcher and the prime catcher. So that was something definitely different to note compared to the normal Western lists. Next, we have Future Hands with 84 decks, making up 3.43% of the top 16 City League meta. Like I said, Future Hands is now less popular than Miraidon EX with Hands, but Iron Hands has gotten a new partner potentially here with Iron Thorns EX. Iron Thorns EX looked really strong in Japan prior to Dragapult EX being released, but in the West we're receiving it in the same set as Dragapult. And the problem here is that Iron Thorns EX shuts down rulebox abilities and doesn't do too much damage, and Dragapult EX does not care about that ability pretty much whatsoever. So Iron Thorns EX not as strong now that Dragapult EX, a huge HP Pokemon, really good attacker with no abilities, is in the meta. However, this Future Hands dex is still fast at taking prize cards aggressively, so it can definitely catch opponents off guard with the aggression of Ampy very much, helped by Electric Generator and also by Miraidon's Peak Acceleration. If a deck is faltering to set up, you could just steal the game away with a few Ampy very muches. Next, we have Greninja EX decks, with 76 Greninja EX decks being played in the City Leagues at 3.10% of the meta. I think Greninja EX was garnering some hype and potential prior to Dragapult EX being released in Japan, since they have 2 mini sets that make up our Twilight Masquerade, so cards like Greninja EX and Iron Thorns EX were released about a month or 2 prior to Dragapult over there. So Greninja EX, a card that has, like I said, some potential, some hype, strong attack to do 170 and search for any cards you want, and then also a spread attack that's kind of like Gmax Rapid Flow from Rapid Strike or Shifu VMAX. So we see attacks here that have attributes that we've seen in the past be successful, but I think the biggest problem is that Greninja EX is just shut down by Manaphy for its bench sniping, whereas Dragapult EX is not shut down by Jirachi. So that's one of the biggest things here that I'm seeing. Also, of course, Greninja EX has a weakness and Dragapult EX has no weakness. Also, Dragapult EX has Dracloak with a great ability on it, and Greninja EX does not have that. However, Greninja EX is still popping up a bit. This is what the deck lists are generally looking like, and the most popular A-spec for this archetype is Unfair Stamp. Next, going below 3%, we have Gholdengo EX with 68 decks and 2.78% of the meta. I don't think Gholdengo EX is necessarily a great deck, but it is showing up in some sort of quantity here, so I know that there are some diehard Gholdengo fans out there that would want to see this. This is what the deck lists are typically looking like over in Japan, and it's not really anything different to look at here. All these cards were previously available prior to Twilight Masquerade. I think the biggest change would be that the Gimme Ghouls are all 70 HP now to get around Dragapult EX's 6 damage counters that it can place on the bench. And you'll be seeing this a lot more 70 HP basics, 80 HP basics instead of like their 50 or 60 HP counterparts. Next, just below Gholdengo EX is Snorlax Stall with 65 decks, making up 2.66% of the top 16 City League meta. Snorlax Stall does gain some important cards, actually. The most notable is the Performance Flute item, which reads, reveal the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck and put any number of basic Pokemon you find there onto your opponent's bench, then shuffle the remaining cards back into their deck. So this can be really, really good at trapping Pokemon on your opponent's bench. If they're keeping them out of their hand for Erica's Invitation, they're keeping them out of the discard from Mantine. Now, Performance Flute can just grab those Pokemon from the deck. So this is actually super scary if you're playing a deck that's kind of weak to Snorlax Stall. In addition, there's also the Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon EX. This is not in the list that we're looking at today, but it is a card to keep your eye on. It has the ability that prevents all damage done to it by opponent's Pokemon that have an ability. So this is just a good stall or control card that we'll probably see people make some use out of in this format. Next, going all the way down to 1.47% of the top 16 City League meta is Arctina. Arctina doesn't look like it's going to be a top runner or very popular, but I know that there are people who like Arceus decks or just want something easy to pick up that's a consistent beatdown deck. So I thought this one would be important to feature, even though it's not very popular. This is what the lists are currently looking like. There are no new cards included in this generated 60 card skeleton for the Arceus Giratina list, but I didn't do too much of a deep dive on these lower percentage decks. So definitely let me know if there are some cards you think could be included in these lower percentage decks like Arceus Giratina. Yeah, looking pretty much like a typical Arceus Giratina list would look in the Western meta as well here. Like I said, low percentage deck, so also not as many deck lists to take data from for Arceus Giratina. And the last one we're looking at here is an interesting one. It's Raging Bolt EX with the Grass Ogerpon EX. Only 30 decks within the top 16 placements, making up 1.23%. But Japanese City League season ended on May 6th, and this Raging Bolt Ogerpon EX deck just started picking up steam towards the end of the City League season. So I think this would have become a lot more popular if we had another week or two of City Leagues to look at the data from. So here is the 60 card generated skeleton from Trainer Hill for Raging Bolt EX with Ogerpon EX. So Raging Bolt EX Sandy Shocks was already like a rogue archetype. It didn't seem very, very strong, but Ogerpon EX is an undeniably fantastic card, giving you energy acceleration and card draw at the same time. So I think Ogerpon EX is just going to find some kind of partner to succeed with, and right now it looks like Raging Bolt EX might just be that. It's good because you have Raging Bolt EX that can essentially knock out anything at once, but then you also have Ogerpon EX, which can hit Charizard EX for weakness if Charizard EX does stay popular. So this is one to look out for in the weeks leading up to NAIC. Like I said, the City League events in Japan have winded down now for the season, and this one just started popping up more recently towards the end of those events. So that's everything I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know if there's anything important I missed in this countdown of the most popular archetypes from Japanese City League events and the deck lists for all of the decks. Shout out again to trainerhill.com and limitlesstcg.com for the data that I got for making this video. And also, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe for more Pokemon content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.